Mason. This is the Happy Raccoon podcast, and today we have our good friend Mervin. How do you pronounce your last name?
Stoltzfus.
Stoltzfus.
Correct.
That's not at all how I would have tried to pronounce it.
No, the F-U-S in the last three letters just kind of throws everybody off.
Yeah.
In fact, there is in my lineage some family members that end up changing it to a double O instead of a U.
Interesting.
So it's actually easier to pronounce, or that's when you read it.
Yeah. What do you know the origin of that last
It's
name?
German.
German. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, that's a crazy last name. Becca was trying to tell me how to pronounce it, and I was like, I don't think that's correct.
Most people don't.
Yeah. Okay. You must get that a lot. Very cool. Well, I've been really looking forward to having you on. I've known of you for a little while. I met you probably 2 years ago or so. I've been looking forward to having you on here because the big elephant in the room is that you were formerly Amish, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so I'm a huge fan of reality TV of any kind. In fact, my current reality TV guilty pleasure is 1,000 Pound Sisters. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it, never watched it at all.
Oh my gosh, it is incredible. But I've always been a huge sucker for reality TV, even like reality documentaries like Tiger King. I don't know if you're familiar with Tiger King. But I've always just been fascinated with just the immense amount of culture within our own country. Different types of people, ranging from 1,000 Pound Sisters to Tiger King, to shows like Breaking Amish, and not that is is in its own category, but right. So I'm obviously super excited to have you here. One of my very first impressions of you actually was 4th of July last year, maybe the year before that.
Okay.
You were there and you brought some like hand pies, they're called?
Fried pies, yes.
Fried pies. It was one of the most delicious things I ever had. Is that like an Amish thing?
It is, yes.
Okay, because I think, so for someone on the outside looking in, the very big stereotypes of Amish people are that they make very handcrafted things.
That's correct.
And they have some very delicious handcrafted food that you've never really heard of. I think the most popular one that comes to my mind is that they hand churn butter, but I don't know how real that is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure in some communities they would still, but yeah.
Yeah, we're breaking down some stereotypes because, again, it's kind of a trip to me to think about you being Amish. So, again, I'm just happy you're here. Thanks so much for coming on. I've got all sorts of questions for you, and I'm really just going to rattle them off, but I just want to hear your story, basically. So I guess the first question is when did you break Amish? Or is that the right term, by the way?
Well, not really. I mean, sort of, I guess. It depends how you would look at it. So I never really physically broke away or necessarily. I was actually 11 years old when my parents left.
Interesting. So
it was never really a decision of my personal own to leave the Amish. That would have been my parents. So as a child, I just went on. But if you're talking about breaking from the Amish or growing up, or like for us, we just more like we leave the Amish. It's like leaving a group of people. Yeah. I mean, some people call it breaking away, so it's really kind of a preference.
Yeah, I think it probably just comes from my reality TV.
Sure,
I know what they say on reality TV. The TV show I think is called Breaking Amish,
right.
I think if you ever watched season 1, have you ever seen it? The show?
I watched a couple episodes. I never really got into it.
Yeah. But so, do you know why have you had these conversations with your parents? Do you know
absolutely.
Why you broke Amish?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There was no question about it. My parents would have found Jesus probably 5 or 7 years before we left.
Okay.
And they got converted and saved. So they were watching and they realized that this is not the place they want their kids to continue to grow into and stay there. They wanted to take their kids someplace where they can actually preach the gospel and follow what they felt was scripture at that time.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that was their desire, and that's why they choose to up and leave.
Okay.
Like they did.
Gotcha. So that brings me to the question then that I've wondered, like, what is the, I guess, what is being Amish? Is being Amish, is it just a lifestyle choice? Is it like a religion? Is it almost, because to me it almost looks like it's in a way kind of like a cult, in that they kind of just, they stay away from society and that they want to just continue to live in old time ways. It's very bizarre to me and strange. But what is being Amish? Is it sort of religious thing, or
it's actually probably about all three of those.
Okay.
So it's a religion to start with, and then amidst of that religion, they're engulfed in a certain culture, and they don't fit the cult stereotype, but you could call them a cult if you really wanted to, because they are pretty controlling.
Yeah.
That's how they keep the people. As far as their lifestyle, it is a lifestyle choice, but a lot of that is trickled down from traditions, because they feel very strongly in staying with tradition. And they feel that's like, I don't know, maybe a sense of security, so to speak.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things you see them do, their dress, the way they live, is basically a straight trickle down from traditions they've done. And that, a lot of things, even a lot of their practices are straight traditional, if they've done for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty much, I mean, it's really encompassed around religion and when it comes down to it.
What is like their core beliefs?
So their core beliefs would be a mixture from Catholicism to Christianity, kind of like a mix between that.
Okay.
Literally, they do come from the Catholics. A couple hundred years ago, over in Germany is where they came from. So they do have some beliefs that would be very close to Catholic. But it's pretty much where it comes down to is, so like in their church services, they will preach the gospel to a certain extent. So like if you're listening, pretty much every Sunday you will hear about heaven and hell. You will hear about being good. You would hear about Jesus Christ. You would hear about, especially over Easter, about him dying on the cross and rising again. But where it really comes down, where they really track off, is when it's like, so they'll be preaching about Jesus and how he died and how he was born and died and came down. But all of a sudden they'll take a hard right turn just before they come down to say that Jesus Christ died for your sins and you need to confess your sins and become, accept Jesus. They will go off and say, all right, you need to be good, by the rules of the church.
Okay. Very legalistic standpoint.
Very much so. Yeah. And so that's where they really veer off. Just before it comes to the true salvation part, be a good Amish person, adhere to the rules of the church, and then we have a good hope that you will make it to heaven.
Okay. So do they have their own sort of variation of the Bible, or do they teach straight out of the Bible as well? They
teach straight out of the Bible, but they do have certain, chapters and verses they'll stick to, just like pretty much any, kind of like the Catholics.
Yeah.
But now the Catholics have their, do the Catholics have some of their own books? I think they do.
I'm sure they do, yeah. Very interesting, because, I think, so what's surprising me is that's actually still even very common outside of the Amish community. I mean, there's still churches that teach a very legalistic version of Christianity.
Right.
So it seems almost like they've sort of just conformed to a certain lifestyle that they prefer, that it seems to align with staying away from sin. I know, I don't know this person personally, but I know a guy who knows a guy who almost seems like he would fit in really well, and that he... he took a verse in that, like, if your eyes cause you to sin, gouge them out, and he quite literally gouged his own eyes out to keep himself from sinning from what he was looking at.
Right.
So it almost just seems like maybe the Amish are conforming to a certain lifestyle to prevent themselves from... It's just fascinating to me entirely.
No, that's very true. That is a very true statement. They are, and that is one of the things they do have certain Bible verses they will quote to believe or to state that this is why we believe this way.
Yeah.
Even though that verse may be taken completely out of context, they say this is what this says, so this is why we're not doing that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Wow. Fascinating. So are you still in contact with any of your family that is still Amish? Do you know anyone that's still Amish?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have good contact with all my relatives. Yeah, they never, they've come visit us some. We more go to them and see them, and they're always very welcome to see us. But yeah, good relationship with them.
That's good. So again, the reality TV makes it look like when you leave, you're out, and there's like a big shunning thing. Is that, how much legitimacy is there to that?
Well, there's a lot of legitimacy to that, and actually very, very serious. Now, some of that varies from where you came from, because even in the Amish church, in the Amish communities, they're very different from different areas.
Yeah.
So like I come from the Lancaster County area, and they're a lot more modern, more progressive, and some of the rules aren't as strict as other areas. Ohio is, they're completely different. I shouldn't say they're completely different, but they'd be a little more legalistic than Lancaster would be. Then you have a bunch of offshoots, smaller communities that can be very strict. And so as far as my family, we never experienced shunning near like you would read about or see on reality TV. Now, like, we do have some family members that will do more than others. But for instance, like if we go to a wedding, some of our family members will invite us to our weddings, others won't. But if we do go, there's always, at lunchtime, there's a separate table for us to eat at.
Interesting.
So like, we wouldn't eat with us kids that were never part of the church would be allowed to eat with everybody else. But like my parents who were members and got excommunicated, they're not allowed to sit at the same table. Wow. Now, some of that does flow into with family members, and they would probably do the same thing at their house. But majority of us, they don't care if it's in their house. It's just like if it's in public view or...
Interesting.
So
it's interesting you say public view, because that seems like a big part of the reality TV look at the Amish community and people, is that they seem to care a lot about how they're perceived by one another in their community. Does that seem, like you mentioned that they want to be out of public's view, like sitting at the table with your parents is okay in their own home, but when it's in public view, it seems like something that's a little bit more, are they just worried about the leaders within the community?
Right,
or?
Because if someone sees them or the wrong person sees them, they could report them to the leader and say, hey, this person was eating at the same table with an excommunicated person. Gotcha. And that could get them in trouble with the church.
Gotcha, okay.
So that's where they become careful of what they do in public view, because like even though they don't agree with the shunning aspect of it, they don't want to get themselves in trouble, so they will watch what they do if someone may be watching them. Okay,
that's very interesting. Do you remember? So 12 or 11 years old, I think you said. Yes. So that's very similar to the age when I moved back to the United States from being a missionary kid in Papua New Guinea. So, so I'm kind of thinking a lot of my experiences from transitioning from one culture to another.
Right.
Do you recall, for instance, like your first like McDonald's cheeseburger? Was that did you have McDonald's when you were still a child in the Amish community, or do you recall that afterwards? What were the biggest things, I guess, since your parents broke Amish that you remember getting to experience for the first time?
I really don't know if there was anything major that I can recall. I mean, talking about McDonald's, I don't remember necessarily going to McDonald's beforehand, but it wasn't something that we did much afterwards either. A lot. I don't know. I don't recall. I mean, probably one of my earliest memories doing certain things like that is probably when I was 5 years old. One of my dad's friends took my dad and I and our hired hand at the time to the Delaware Bay to see the horseshoe crabs. And I remember stopping at a convenience store and my dad bought me Swiss rolls. And to this day, I love Swiss rolls, and I'll remember that. So, doing things outside in the community like that, like going to McDonald's or restaurants, I don't recall much of that happening in my short period of being Amish. It may have happened.
Yeah.
But it's not, we're on a farm there, so it's not like we had much time to go out and do things like that. So, but afterwards, I don't really recall that was anything that happened, like it was a big thing. And as far as things that we couldn't do that we could do afterwards, we had a vehicle, so that helped.
Yeah.
That was different. But other than that, I really don't.
Do you recall being in like the horse carriage thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I remember the first time I saw one of those. I actually got in trouble with my grandmother-in-law over this. So here's the whole story: is that ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted an American Pekin duck. The big white ducks with the yellow bills, the Aflac duck is it's more commonly known.
Right.
I've always wanted one, and I found a Craigslist post that someone was selling ducks and included American Pekin ducks. So I thought it was a lot closer than it was. I drove way out into the boonies and into the rolling hills of farming deep into Pennsylvania. I couldn't tell you where I went, honestly. I could have gone to Mars. I could have gone to Wisconsin. I could have gone to anywhere. But all I knew is I was probably somewhere in Pennsylvania. And I pull up to this house, and it's on this big property, and my breath was taken away because a very skinny, scrawny man came out, and then following him was his wife, who had sprouted an entire beard, and she came out, and then I had a cardboard box that I had some like hay in, and I had a little bit of water in there. And this woman just started shoveling ducks into the back of my 2013 Dodge Dart. And she started shoveling these ducks, and these ducks are quack, 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 and they're pooping everywhere all over the back of my car. And I was just like dumbfounded. I think I paid him like $30 for three American Pekin ducks. I was just like, I just love experiencing things like that. I often find myself asking myself, how in the world did I end up here? You know, grew up in New Guinea, lived in California for a long time, and now I'm here, purchasing some ducks from people that I guess I just presume to be Amish. I don't really know how you identify someone that's Amish or what, someone who might be a variation of that. But as I was leaving, I got stuck on a one-way road where it felt like an eternity behind a horse carriage, and it looked like an entire sort of family was back there, and I just couldn't believe it. And I guess the reason I got in trouble is that I finally got to a place where I could take a lap around, and I thought it was just fascinating to see that. I'd never seen anything like it. So I took a video of them as I drove by, and I thought it was just fascinating, and I posted on Facebook like, wow, like look what I saw at all my California friends. Apparently it's frowned upon to take pictures or videos of Amish people, and so my grandmother-in-law sort of gave me a sly comment on my Facebook post saying that's very disrespectful to do. Is that disrespectful?
Well, I guess depends who you would speak to. They do not believe in having their own pictures taken.
Okay. So
if you just take a photo out and about, I don't really think anybody thinks that's offensive.
Okay. I suppose a lot of people think it'd be offensive at all. I mean, if it was someone in a Toyota Camry and I just took my phone to their face.
I guess that's where you need to look at it is, do you feel that's offensive if someone would do that to you? But for them, as long as you're not in their face and doing it broadly, they don't really...
I don't think I really got anyone's face. It was more just the idea that I was stuck behind a horse carriage for however long. It just...
Right. But going to that point as far as videos or photos, they don't like their own photos taken. They take that, and now going right back to our point earlier about taking scripture out of context, their reasoning for not having photos or their photos taken is they take it from not having any graven images. And it's kind of a stretch, especially for you and I to think about that.
What is a graven image?
You know how Bible talks about not bowing down to any graven images.
Okay.
Having graven images as idols or something like that.
Okay, gotcha.
So they take that whole concept and they put that in photos. So they say they don't want their own photos taken. It's a stretch, but that's what their reasoning is behind that.
That's crazy. I did not know that.
Yeah. So when it comes down to having their photos taken, or a lot of people are really good with asking them to, hey, you mind if I take pictures? And then they'll usually request that their faces weren't in them.
Okay.
Or that directly of them.
Yeah. That's sort of a plot hole in the reality TV.
Yeah.
Because often these, sometimes their faces will blur out, but some of the parents just will be interviewed and be on camera saying, maybe it's just their community doesn't think that same way or whatever. But
true.
That's wow, that's actually really fascinating. I did not know that. I thought it was just, you don't take pictures of Amish people.
No,
for whatever reason.
Because of that. And I remember as a kid in school that, cars would drive past and they'll stop and take photos of kids out there playing.
Really?
We never really paid attention to when they did it. We just mind their own business and let them do what they wanted to do.
Okay.
It didn't happen a lot, but it did happen.
Yeah.
But some people take great offense to that. We, at that school, we didn't really care.
Okay.
So.
Gotcha. Do you know, again, you were really young, but I've always been curious as to, like, what how the government, I guess, perceives Amish people. And I guess the question would be is, what is, like, the Amish main source of income? And do they, go by a similar income? Do they just sort of live off the land? I think there's probably certain levels of extremism. But for instance, like, one question I would ask is, do Amish people pay taxes? I mean, is that something that's pretty normal?
Well, yes. That's a really, actually I was telling my wife about that earlier. That's a really misconceived idea about taxes. They pay all the same tax anybody else does. The only difference is they don't pay Social Security tax. Now that they fought for that. They worked really hard to get that exemption. In fact, there was a panel of men that met with the Supreme Court to be able to get that exemption.
Wow.
So their premise for that is because they don't believe in government help. Mm-hmm. So they're like, why are we paying you this money? Because we're not going to take the money.
Yeah.
So like in that speak, they don't want the government to help them, or they don't want help from the government. They believe in, supporting their own. So being forced to pay this tax, then refuse to accept it, was just bizarre to them. So
I can see that.
Put a panel together, met with the Supreme Court, and they finally struck out a deal. So
interesting.
That's literally the only tax, and that's where the misconception comes in. People are like, oh, they don't pay taxes. Yes, they do. They pay their private taxes and school taxes. They pay school taxes even though they don't send their kids to school.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Crazy.
But as far as income goes, the stereotype of Amish would be the farming community, and they're very, very much a farming community for all of them. But nowadays, in the modern times, you have a lot of carpenters. You even have machine shops. You got, especially in the more modern places like Lancaster and Holmes County, Ohio, you have very modern shops.
Yeah.
Like there's a shop in where I buy all my trailers down there is owned by Amish, but they got a lot of non-Amish working there now because they're so modern. But they have a big, welding shops with CNC machines, and they have computers, and you name it. You wouldn't even, when you walk in there, you would not realize that this is owned by one Amish guy.
Wow.
So
that's fascinating.
But as far as the core, I don't know what the majority now is, but I would say at least 50 to 60% are still farmers.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So you mentioned they don't want any sort of government help. That leads me into one thing I was really curious about. Is that I was going to ask, what would their preferred, or what is the most common political party of choice? Sounds like it'd be very libertarian or independent. Probably libertarian more than anything. If they would even associate them with a party, a lot of them I don't really think really. How do you say it? You know how some people will go if you've asked them like, well, how do you feel politically, they would just like, oh, I'm a Democrat or I'm a libertarian. It's just like cut and dry. Yeah. For them, it's not so much, but they'd be very conservative minded. Yeah, sure.
Republican minded, libertarian. So it probably varies a lot.
Yeah.
But
if you were to guess, I mean, even based on what your family members know, what do they think of a guy like Donald Trump? Kind of a character.
Yeah, someone really liked him, but I don't know about his character-wise.
Yeah.
I haven't really been in, I'm not a really political person myself.
Sure.
So asking those questions is not a big deal to me. They, as far as the conversation I had, they really liked him because of his idea of smaller government.
Yeah.
And less taxes, less regulations. That's right up their alley because they don't want the government encroaching into their lives.
Yeah.
And some of that is stemmed directly down from years and years ago, because the reason they're even in America is because they were trying to find a place where they can have religious freedom.
Yeah.
So it kind of hits the core when you have government coming in and encroaching on their rights, maybe not even their rights per se, but the possibility of losing what they want is very real to them.
Yeah, it's really a lot of people. Yeah.
I mean, they're direct descendants of the Anabaptists who were, imprisoned for their faith.
Yeah.
And they left Germany because
Right.
They want to get away from state churches and be forced to do certain things.
Yeah.
And that spills right into like their schools now. When public schools became mandatory, they had to fight to get their own schools.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, there was fathers that ended up doing prison time.
Really?
Yeah, for refusing to send their kids to public school until they were able to
wow.
strike a deal with the government to have their own schools.
Wow,
so some of that, when it comes to government, it gets very sensitive for it because they're very sensitive to the fact that these things that we hold dear could be taken away from us. Depends who is in power. So when it comes to Donald Trump, that's one thing they liked about him because he was not big in regulations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was...
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I always kind of wondered because, to me, they just seem like this sort of, I don't want to say mystical, beings, but they seem like some of the kindest people. The few that I've met are just some incredibly kind of people. But it's just kind of cool, even just to talk about it casually, to almost just to humanize them to me a little bit for my own.
Oh, absolutely.
I almost I feel like I'm a big fan in a way because again, huge into reality TV, and so it's interesting. Do you think that most of them they do vote? Are they registered to vote?
That probably varies a lot from community to community. I think it would be frowned upon a little bit if you would actually talk to their church leaders. But on the individual level, a good bit of them, especially the younger generation, does. Especially coming out of Lancaster County, they do a good bit. Now, Holmes County, Ohio, I have really no idea how they stand there. Now, when we come into the smaller, more plainer groups that you see scattered out throughout New York State, especially, a lot of those wouldn't.
Yeah.
And even if they pay attention, I don't know if they pay attention to politics much. I doubt it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the percentage of, like, from where I come from, Lancaster County, I don't know how many are registered to vote, but I would say there's a fair number.
Yeah. How big was, like, the community you lived in? Several thousand, several hundred?
Well, that depends how you break it up. Like, in the church district that we lived in, I think that church had around 32 families, somewhere in there. And so that would, I don't know how many people that would come out to, but...
Yeah, do Amish people have a lot of children?
Yes.
Yeah? How many brothers and sisters do you have?
So I have 11, there's 11 of us total.
Okay,
We got 2 brothers and 8 sisters.
Very cool. Are you guys, so I know you have... one son named Mason, which is a fantastic name.
Yes, it is.
And you have another one on the way. You said his name was Parker.
Correct.
Very cool. How many you guys plan on having?
Well,
You gonna keep with the Amish tradition there?
No, I don't. That's not really the plan. No.
Yeah, it's what your wife's call.
Yeah, right. We'll probably have 3 or 4. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
See what happens. See what God brings us. But
very cool.
But yeah, no, we're not really into the huge family like that. But I mean, I don't have any regrets in growing up with a big family. I think we had a lot of fun. But
yeah, is there anyone in your family that, since your parents, broke Amish? I'll use that term because it's the common term. But is there anyone that went back amongst your brothers and sisters?
No.
Okay.
No. That is pretty uncommon for that to happen. Once someone leaves, there's almost never them going back. I don't know of any situation other than like the young people when they 16, 17, they leave for a short time, they might come back, but other than that, almost never.
Does the Amish community, do they accept new people that have come from, like, for instance, if I decided that I wanted to become an Amish person with my wife and daughters, would they accept someone like me? I mean, would does the tattoos be a problem? I'm very curious.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
They do accept people, but that is very, very rare. There is one prominent Amishman that lives in Ontario, Canada, that, again, David Leedy, I think his name is. He grew up Catholic, went to Catholic college, maybe? Did go to college, and sometime after that, he was studying the Amish, and he thought that was the right path, the right religion. But he's one of the very few that ever succeeded. Learned the language and everything.
A language?
Yeah, they had their own language.
Really? Amish people have their own language?
Yes.
How do I not know? What is it, like a mix between German and English, or what is it?
It is a German dialect. It's called Pennsylvania Deutsch.
Really?
Yeah. So that's where a lot of this, you see Pennsylvania Dutch stuff. That's where a lot of that comes from. So it's a German dialect, and it is nowadays. It's a little more a lot of English words in it. But yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Because the only time I've ever heard the terms Pennsylvania Dutch would be in something that Dwight Schrute from The Office had said. I don't know if you have ever seen The Office, but he says something about like a Pennsylvania Dutch Christmas. Are you familiar with what that is?
I don't.
Okay, that was my next question, because if you did Belschnickel as a kid, and you have to be a big Office fan to know what I'm referencing, but that's fascinating. I think that there's some references of Dwight Schrute's family. They're like a German family, and they have a farm, so that's probably what he's referencing. But that's crazy. I did not know they had their own language. I thought if anything it would be just English or German, but...
Right, they have their own language that they speak, but then in their church services are completely in German.
Really? Do you still speak German?
I can still speak it, yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. The only German I know is our coworkers when we were in New Guinea. They were from Germany. The only German word I think I can say, besides the obvious like nine, would be the town I lived in, which was Gummuschbach, Germany. That's the only thing I could say in German. But wow, that's fascinating. I did not know they had their own language. So like... Obviously, it's very rare to accept someone. My next question was like, you don't see really any African American Amish people. That's probably even a larger stretch to someone for an African American to become an Amish person.
Right.
But so do you see then, if you were to make a prediction over the next 100 years, if the Amish community is accepting it at a pretty low rate, if you say it's pretty rare for someone to become an Amish person and to at least go to the full extreme of learning the language and all of that, do you think that over a period of time that the Amish community will slowly evaporate?
No, it actually won't. It's sustaining their own just by their own.
Yeah.
I can't remember the statistics, but I think they were doubling their population every 20 years or so.
Wow. That's
something
crazy.
like that. But yeah, they've been growing. Now in the last 20 years, they've probably lost more than they have in the 100 years before that.
Yeah.
Because of the modern technology and people able to learn things, realizing that, this is maybe...
Yeah.
They've lost a lot more. But yeah, they'll be able to sustain their own no problem for a long, long, long time.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That is absolutely wild. So do you think that a lot of the people in the Amish communities that maybe are a little bit more, you said Lancaster's pretty modern, maybe some ones that are not as modern, do you think they are aware of like modern technology, like the cell phones and computers and everything that we can do?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're very, very well aware of what they can have and what they don't have. It's just, yeah, they're not blind to it at all. There's a community up in Central New York that I deal with a lot through work. I haul a lot of their sheds. They're very plain, and like all their tools, any modern or any power tool they have is run by a gasoline motor.
Really?
So you can't name anything that they use that's not run by a gasoline motor. If it's not run by a gasoline motor or they do by hand, they don't have it.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable to me. There's people, there's just such different cultures. I mean, it's fascinating. It really is. I think, I've been exposed so limitedly to the Amish community, and so what? I mentioned this briefly. This is a question I wanted to ask. What do they think of tattoos? I got a handful of them. Is it something that are you personally offended by tattoos? It's something that they're pretty against. I would imagine they're pretty against tattoos.
They're very against them, and I have really no idea. I don't really know where they would stand on it, and as far as saying it's wrong or right, they don't bother me at all. I could care less about them. The only thing only scripture or whatever you could say coming from the Bible that they might say like it's wrong is you're marring up the body that God gave you or something like that. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just
I've heard that before. You're not hurting my feelings in any way, by the way. I've heard it, and yeah, there's a Bible verse. And people interpret it in different ways. But yeah, not, your body's a temple, don't mark up your body. A lot of people, I know traditionally, I'd be very curious to know if Amish people would think of it this way, but a lot of people for a long time thought that tattoos were like the mark of the beast, and
it could very well. They could very well.
I could see that. Yeah, interesting. I know. I remember because it was a summer day when I went to go pick up my ducks, and I had a sleeveless shirt on, and I have pretty much a full sleeve all the way up to my shoulder. And I could tell they were like a little. It's always funny because when you have a bunch of tattoos, it has certain connotations that you're this, sort of this bad, dark dude. And I couldn't be
right to the stereotype.
Yeah, I couldn't be any more opposite of that.
Right.
Is there anything that you still do, or your family still does, keeping up with like Amish tradition? Like anything that you guys, is there like Amish holidays, for instance?
Oh, as far as when it comes to Amish holidays, yes, they have their own holidays.
Really?
Absolutely. As far as my family, I can't really say that we stick to any necessary traditions. There's obviously the traits that carried through. A lot of some values that they would hold dearly to. Mm. Those I still highly respect those values and would, especially like taking care of their own. They're really big on taking care of their own. I support that wholeheartedly, and I prefer that myself. Things like taking care of their elderly. Mm-hmm. You don't see Amish people going to the nursing homes.
Yeah.
So things like that. But as far as specifics, I can't really name. Like this is something that we're going to carry on because that's what the Amish did. But when it comes to their own holidays, they. I can't even think. They're usually around. The springtime is the big ones. I think Ascension Day they take off. Ascension Day is a big one for them.
Do they celebrate Christmas?
Absolutely. Christmas.
Okay.
So they would have Christmas. Thanksgiving is, I'm not sure how certain areas celebrate Thanksgiving. Like in Lancaster County, in November and December, Tuesday and Thursdays are wedding days. And so Thanksgiving lands on a Thursday every year, so that's usually a wedding day. So that's really Thanksgiving is not necessarily a big thing down there because it's usually a wedding day and people are off to weddings or whatever. That's technically a holiday, but so Ascension Day, I think Good Friday probably. Easter Monday, I think those three.
Yeah, so the common religious holidays.
Yeah, then they. December 26th, they celebrate a second Christmas. It's not a big holiday, but usually they're off work and stuff like that.
Very cool.
Some of the certain areas of the Amish still celebrate Old Christmas, which is January 6th.
Okay.
Well, we never did growing up in Pennsylvania, but I think that's an Ohio thing. If I remember right.
Very interesting. So when was the last time you've made contact with some of your Amish family? Are they aware of the global pandemic now?
Absolutely. Yeah, they're very well aware of that. But as far as last contact, my grandmother, my dad's mother, passed away in December. I'm sorry to hear that. So we were down for the funeral for that one.
Okay.
And then we also went to see her when she was sick, beginning of November.
Okay. Gotcha.
So we've been around them a little bit in November, December.
Okay, gotcha.
Then my parents, they probably had, I know they were invited to at least 6 weddings this fall, and they made, I think, 3 of them.
Okay.
So, we get to see them quite frequently. It all depends how much we want to get down there and stuff like that and see what's going on. But
okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I know you got married probably, 2 years ago? You and Amanda got married?
Yes, be 2 years coming up in June.
Very cool. Did any of your Amish family attend the wedding?
Oh, a good bit of them, actually.
Really?
I think majority of all my aunts and uncles showed up. I know my one uncle didn't, and his wife didn't come. That I can think of. Other than that, I think the majority of them were there. My dad's parents didn't show up because my grandmother wasn't feeling so great over that time. But then my mom's dad, she came. Or he came. Okay. So, yeah.
Very cool.
They'll come to stuff like that. They'll have no issues attending events like that.
Awesome. Very cool. So, at the beginning of this podcast, you mentioned your parents were converted, and then a few years later, you guys, left the Amish community.
Right.
How, I guess, so knowing that it's more of a legalistic look at Christianity, a little bit more on the Catholicism, how actively are you aware anyway that, the Christian church, the ones that that you and I attend, like Bridgewater, and for instance, how is evangelical Christianity in a more of a modern sense? Are they pursuing the Amish community that you're aware of? How hard is it to reach Amish people to sort of convert them to a more modern and more grace-centered version of Christianity?
That I'm not sure how much that's happening as far as outside churches trying to reach the Amish community. I know there's certain individuals throughout the last 20 years that I personally know that tried, had to take a serious interest in reaching them. As far as churches, I don't know if much of it's done.
Yeah.
I don't live right in the midst of the community anymore, so I don't know how much that's going on. But in Lancaster County, at one point in time, you could have pretty much said that 90% of the Amish people were non-Christian. If you want, they had their religious beliefs, but they thought the church was going to save them versus Jesus Christ was going to save them.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But that has really changed in the last 20 years. I don't know if it was probably the modern technology and them having access to information is probably what helped more than anything. But now I have cousins that I have spiritual conversation with, and I know without a shadow of doubt they're Christians and love the Lord, and they'll tell you right up front, and that they still stay there. And one of the reasons for staying there is they feel that they can have an influence on the younger generation coming up.
That's great.
And so that's one reason they stay there.
Yeah.
I don't. Sometimes that is misled. Other times it's great.
Yeah.
One of my cousins that I love to pieces, loves the Lord. He's passionate. He's just on fire for God. And that's his goal. He's like, I'm here. And he'll tell you he would love to actually go to a different church that preached the gospel clearly, but he feels that God wants him there at this point in time because he can be an influence on the other people. And there's definitely way more of that happening now than it has ever been. But then you go to some of these more conservative areas, there's very little.
Yeah.
Very, very little. And I don't know how much outside people are reaching in. But if anybody ever has a desire to reach the Amish community, the best way you can do it is just be a friend to them. And becoming friends, earn their trust, and then, show them what the gospel is all about.
Yeah.
And they may accept it or may not, or they might stay, just like any other people. But yeah, I think most importantly is you got to earn their trust and respect first. Yeah. Before you can really make the inroad there.
That's fascinating. Awesome. Well, I think that's a really great spot to end this conversation. This has been really, really fascinating for me. Again, I'm just enamored by all of that. Coming from the West Coast where it's pretty much unheard of out there. I really appreciate you coming by, you sharing your story a little bit. I feel like the whole premise of this podcast is for me to sort of develop friendships with people that I know that are fascinating. Since moving out here, I've met some incredible people, including yourself. And anyways, really appreciate you coming on and telling me again all of your stories and answering my, sometimes maybe obvious or goofy questions. But again, this has been really awesome. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's not often I get to share what goes on in certain other areas, and it's great. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good thing you remember these people are still out there, and that again you mentioned that you just respect them and love them, and I think that's so much of what our entire culture needs is just more just loving one another and building up good neighborly conversations with one another. So it's a good thing. But anyways, thank you so much, Mervin. I really appreciate it, and that's gonna wrap up this episode.
All right, awesome.